Derek spent 3 years telling Maya that as a woman with no family, she was a ghost that the world would eventually forget. He told her she was invisible until she sat beside a man who looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered in the city he already owned. The city bus groaned as it turned a sharp corner, the tires splashing through oily puddles. Maya Cole huddled into the torn fabric of her white dress, her fingers white-knuckled around her black leather handbag. She sat in the very corner of the blue-gray seat, trying to make her body as small and thin as possible. The reflection in the bus window showed a woman Maya barely recognized. She was bruised, bleeding, and broken. A dark purple bruise bloomed around her left eye, and thin cuts from Derek's rings jagged across her forehead and cheek. She looked at the other passengers under the dim, cool lights. They were ordinary people going home from work. Some looked at her with pity, but most turned their heads away. This was a nobody complex Derek had built for her. He had convinced her that because she had no parents or siblings, no one would ever step in to save her. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every time the bus slowed down for a stop, she expected Derek to burst through the doors with that jagged rage in his eyes. She could still feel the heat of his breath and the way he had hissed that she was nothing without him. She was a slim woman with natural black curls that were now frizzy and messy from the struggle. Her medium brown face was pale, and her large, glossy eyes were wide with fear that had become her only way of surviving. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get away from Derek Shaw. Suddenly, the air on the bus shifted. It grew heavy with a cold, controlled pressure that made the hair on the back of Maya's neck stand up. A subtle scent of expensive cedar and something sharper, like cold metal, drifted over her. Maya finally forced herself to glance sideways, and her breath caught in her throat. Sitting directly beside her was a man who looked like he was made of stone. Kai Min was a young man with sharp features and a clean, well-defined jawline. He was dressed in a black tailored suit that cost more than everything Maya had ever owned. His black shirt was crisp, and a deep red tie stood out like a drop of blood against his chest. Unlike the other passengers, he wasn't looking away. He was leaning back, his hands resting calmly on his knees, taking up space with a quiet dominance. Small, intricate black tattoos snaked up his neck and disappeared into his swept-back hair. Maya realized with a jolt of terror that she had sat beside a man who lived in a world of true violence, a man who didn't just survive the dark, but ruled it. The bus doors hissed open at the next stop with a heavy, mechanical sigh. The cold night air rushed in, but it was a man who stepped on the bus that froze the oxygen in Maya's lungs. Derek Shaw stepped into the dim light, his eyes red and scanning the rows of seats like a shark in shallow water. In his right hand, the blade of a kitchen knife caught the pale glow of the overhead lights. The few passengers who saw the metal gasped and scrambled back into their seats. A thick, suffocating panic filled the bus. Maya felt her heart stop. She squeezed her black handbag against her chest, her knuckles turning a ghostly white. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like they were made of stone. She was trapped. Derek's gaze snapped at the back of the bus. When he spotted the torn white dress in Maya's swollen eye, a jagged, ugly smile broke across his face. He didn't say a word. He just began to move, pushing past a terrified older man in the aisle. Each step he took made the floorboards of the bus creak. "Found you," he hissed, his voice a low crawl of malice. Maya closed her eyes, waiting for the familiar wave of his hand to drag her away. But the blow never came. Instead, she felt a sudden change in the air beside her. Kai Min moved with a grace that was almost impossible to follow. One moment he was sitting in calm silence. The next, he was standing fully upright in the center of the aisle. He didn't move quickly or shout. He simply unfolded his tall frame, stepping directly into Derek's path. His black suit and deep red tie acted as a wall of shadow between the hunter and the prey. Derek skidded to a halt. His arm was still raised with a knife, but his feet refused to take another step. He looked up at Kai, and his angry expression began to crumble. He saw the sharp, expensive cut of the suit. He saw the intricate black ink of the dragon tattoos crawling up Kai's neck. Most of all, he saw Kai's eyes. They weren't filled with fear or even anger. They were filled with a clinical, icy boredom. The bus was silent. The only sound was the heavy throb of the engine. Kai didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't even raise his hands. He just stood there with an absolute certainty that he owned every inch of the space he occupied. Derek's hand began to shake. His bravado, which had lasted for 3 years, hit a wall of true power and shattered. He looked at the knife in his hand, and for the first time, it looked like a toy. He realized he wasn't facing a victim's friend. He was facing a god of the underworld. The bus pulled into the next stop. The doors opened again. Kai stepped half an inch forward, and the sheer weight of his presence forced Derek to take a step back. Without a word, Derek turned and scrambled off the bus, disappearing into the dark shadows of the street. Kai remained standing, his gaze fixed on the empty doorway. He didn't look back at Maya yet. He simply adjusted his red tie. Maya realized then that men who hunt with knives run from men who don't need them. The bus doors closed, cutting off the sound of Derek's frantic footsteps on the pavement. Maya sat in the sudden silence, her chest heaving as she tried to pull air into her lungs. The man in the black suit did not sit back down. He turned his head slightly, his gaze moving from the empty doorway to Maya's trembling hands. He didn't offer a hand to help her up, but his presence felt like a shield that had finally stopped the rain. "Come," Kai said. His voice was a low, smooth hum that seemed to vibrate through the very floor of the bus. Maya stood on unsteady legs. She followed him off at the next stop, her torn white dress fluttering in the cold wind. Waiting at the curb was a sleek, black SUV with windows so dark they looked like polished obsidian. A man in a dark suit stepped out to open the door, his eyes scanning the street with sharp military focus. Kai gestured for her to enter first. As the heavy door thudded shut, the noise of the city vanished. The inside of the car smelled of expensive leather and cedar wood. They drove through the winding streets of the city in total silence. Maya watched the neon lights blur past the tinted glass. She felt like a ghost being carried away to another world. Eventually, the car slowed in front of a soaring building made of glass and steel. It looked like a monolith piercing the dark clouds. High walls topped with cameras surrounded the base, and armed guards stood at the iron gates. They didn't ask for ID. They simply bowed as the SUV passed. Maya realized then that this was not a house. It was a fortress. When they stepped into the lobby, the air felt different, colder, and more serious. The floor was made of dark, polished concrete that reflected the dim lights. The furniture was minimal and sharp, and men in tactical gear moved through the hallways with a quiet, lethal purpose. Every person they passed stopped and bowed their heads to Kai. He moved through the space with the absolute certainty of a king walking through his own palace. Maya clutched her black handbag tighter against her side. She looked at the tattoos on Kai's neck, and then back at the soldiers in the shadows. A strange thought entered her mind. She had spent 3 years running from a small, loud monster named Derek. Now, she had walked straight into the den of a dragon, but as she looked at Kai's calm profile, she felt a flicker of something new. Derek hunted because he was weak and needed to feel big. Kai was already a god of the city. Dragons didn't spend their time hunting mice. Kai led her to a private elevator that rose silently to the summit of the building. The doors opened to a guest suite that was larger than any home Maya had ever seen. The walls were glass, overlooking the glowing grid of the city below. "You can stay as long as you need," Kai said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. He looked at her one last time before turning to leave. "No one enters this fortress without my permission. You are safe here." The heavy door to the guest suite clicked shut, leaving Maya in a silence so thick it felt like a blanket. The room was beautiful, filled with soft lights and expensive furniture, but she stood frozen in the center of the plush carpet. She still held her black handbag against her chest like a shield. Her heart was finally slowing down, but her mind was racing. She walked toward the bathroom, where a wall of mirrors reflected the bright, clinical light. For a long time, Maya couldn't look up. In her head, she could still hear Derek's voice. It was a cruel, repetitive whisper that had lived in her ears for 3 years. "You have no family, Maya. No one is coming for you. Without me, you are just a ghost that no one can see." When she finally lifted her gaze, the person in the mirror looked like a stranger. The white dress was ruined. It was torn at the shoulder and stained with dark spots of blood and dirt from the bus floor. Her medium brown skin was marked by the deep purple bruise around her eye. Her lip was swollen, and the thin cuts on her forehead looked like jagged red lines against her pale face. She looked at her reflection and felt a wave of shame. But as she stared into her own glossy eyes, a new thought began to grow. Derek had spent years trying to break her, yet here she was. She had been hit, but she had not fallen. She had been chased, but she had not been caught. She looked at the bruises and didn't see weakness anymore. She saw proof that she was a fighter. She had survived a war that was meant to destroy her. Maya reached for the zipper of the ruined white dress. She let the fabric fall to the cold marble floor, leaving it there like a snake shedding its old, dead skin. She stepped into the large walk-in shower and turned the handle. The water was hot and powerful. As she stood under the spray, she watched the pink-tinted water swirl down the drain. The blood, the dirt, and the memory of Derek's touch were being washed away. She reached up and began to wash her hair. The natural, tight curls that Derek always told her to hide began to spring back to life. They felt thick and strong under her fingers. She stayed under the water until her skin was warm, and the steam filled the room like a protective cloud. When she stepped out and wrapped herself in a thick, charcoal-colored robe, she went back to the mirror. The bruises were still there, but the woman behind them looked different. Her shoulders were a little straighter. Her jaw was set firm. "I am not a ghost," she whispered to the empty room. Her voice was small, but it was steady. "Ghosts don't bleed. Ghosts don't run. And ghosts definitely don't survive a man like Derek." She looked at the door, knowing Kai Min and his soldiers were standing guard outside. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't waiting for the world to swallow her whole. She was still here, and she was just getting started. The morning sun hit the glass walls of the suite with sharp, gray light. Maya woke up in the massive bed, feeling the weight of the charcoal robe against her skin. A soft knock at the door made her sit up. When the door opened, Kai Min stood there. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket today, just a black button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. In his hands, he held a stack of clean, dark clothes. "The white dress was a target," Kai said, his voice calm and steady. "Wear these. They are for a person who does not want to be found." Maya took the clothes, a soft black sweater and dark, fitted jeans. They felt thick and high quality. Once she was dressed, she followed him through the silent hallways of the fortress. They didn't go to an office or a dining room. Instead, Kai led her to a large, empty room with a polished wood floor and mirrors that covered every wall. There were no weights or punching bags. It was just a wide, open space filled with light. Maya stood in the center of the room, her shoulders naturally hunching forward as they always did. She felt small and out of place. "Derek didn't just hurt you with his hands, Maya," Kai said, walking around her like a wolf. "He hurt you with his words until you tried to disappear. He made you small. Now, you're going to learn how to take up space." He stepped in front of her. He didn't ask her to make a fist. Instead, he reached out and lightly touched her shoulders, nudging them back. He tapped her chin, signaling for her to lift it until she was looking directly ahead. He told her to plant her feet firmly on the floor, shoulder-width apart. "Your body is not an apology," he whispered. "You have a right to the air you breathe and the ground you stand on. Stop trying to hide." For the next hour, they didn't fight. They walked. Kai made her walk from one side of the room to the other over and over again. Every time she looked down at her feet, he stopped her. Every time she hurried her pace out of fear, he made her start over. He taught her to move with fluid grace, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. Then came the eyes. Kai stood directly in front of her, his gaze intense and unblinking. "Your eyes are weapons," he told her. "In my world, you either make people feel seen or you make them disappear. If you look away, you lose. Look through him, Maya. Don't look at his anger. Look at the space behind him." Maya felt awkward. She felt like a broken machine trying to pretend it was new. But then, she caught a glimpse of herself in the long mirror. She saw a woman with her head held high. She saw shoulders that weren't shaking. For a second, the bruises on her face didn't look like injuries. They looked like war paint. Something shifted deep inside her chest. She wasn't a victim pretending to be strong. She was a survivor learning how to be a storm. The sun dipped below the city skyline, turning the sky a deep, bruised purple that matched the marks on Maya's face. She sat across from Kai in his office, a room made of dark stone and glass that seemed to float above the world. The city lights twinkled like cold diamonds far below. Kai sat behind his desk, his red tie loose and his black sleeves rolled up, revealing the intricate ink on his forearms. Maya looked at her hands, which were finally steady. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was a quiet space that invited her to speak. "Why are you doing this, Kai?" she asked. Her voice was soft but clear. "You don't know me. I'm just a woman you found on a bus. Why go to all this trouble for someone who has nothing to offer you?" Kai didn't answer right away. He reached for a cigarette, then changed his mind and leaned back in his chair. His focused eyes met hers, and for a moment, the mask of the Mafia boss slipped. "I wasn't always a man sitting in this chair," he said. "I grew up in the shadows of the very streets you were running through. I was orphaned before I knew my own last name. I had no parents to protect me and no siblings to call for help." Maya felt a tightening in her chest. She had spent years believing her lack of family was a hole she would eventually fall into. "In this city, people think being alone makes you a victim," Kai continued. "Derek used your isolation to build a cage around you. He wanted you to believe that without him, you didn't exist. But I learned a different lesson on those streets. Having no family didn't make me weak. It made me dangerous. I had nothing to lose and everything to build. When you have no foundation, you have to become the rock yourself." He stood up and walked to the window, his reflection ghostly against the glass. "Isolation is not a weakness, Maya. It is a shield. It means the world has no hooks to grab you with. It means you are a ghost, and a ghost cannot be struck." Maya looked at the tattoos on his wrists and realized they weren't just art. They were armor. She thought about her own life, the years of silence and the feeling that she was invisible to everyone but her abuser. They were both survivors of the same cold desert. "How do you stop it?" Maya whispered. "How do you stop feeling like you don't deserve to exist?" Kai turned back to her. His expression was serious and honest. "You don't stop feeling it," he said. "The doubt never truly goes away. You just act like you deserve to be here anyway. You stand tall. You speak clearly. You take up space. You do it every single day until the world finally believes you. And eventually you start to believe it, too." Maya felt a spark of warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the room's heater. She realized she wasn't just learning how to stand. She was learning how to be the architect of her own life. While Maya was learning to stand tall in the light of the penthouse, Derek Shaw was sinking deeper into the shadows of the city. He paced back and forth in a grimy warehouse that smelled of old oil and stale cigarette smoke. His hair was messy, and his eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. To Derek, Maya wasn't a person. She was a piece of property that had dared to walk away. Every hour she was gone felt like a personal insult to his pride. He met with a group of street thugs who sat on crates, watching him with cold, greedy eyes. Derek threw a heavy bag of cash and a handful of gold watches onto a rusted metal table. The clatter of the jewelry echoed against the high, dark ceiling. "I need to find a woman," Derek growled, his voice cracking with desperation. "She's with some Asian guy. He's young, probably rich, and definitely connected. He thinks he can just take what belongs to me." He pulled out a crumpled photo of Maya from his pocket and smoothed it out on the table. In the picture, she was smiling, a version of her from before the bruises in the white dress. He then described a man from the bus. The sharp suit, the red tie, and the intricate dragon tattoos that snaked up his neck. One of the thugs, a man with a jagged scar across his nose, leaned forward. His face went pale as he listened to the description. He looked at the other men in the room and then back at Derek. "You're talking about Kai Min," the thug whispered, his voice shaking. "Do you have any idea who that is?" "That's the Dragon's Denver. People who cross him don't just get hurt, they disappear. You're asking us to go on a suicide mission." Derek slammed his fist onto the table, making the gold watches jump. He didn't care about the warnings. His ego was a fire that was consuming his common sense. In his mind, Maya was a nobody and an orphan. He couldn't wrap his head around the idea that she had found someone more powerful than him. If he couldn't have her, he wanted to burn down the fortress she was hiding in. "I don't care who he is," Derek screamed, his face turning a dark, angry red. He's just a man. I have the money and you have the guns. We're going to that building, and we're taking her back. The thugs looked at the pile of cash and then at each other. Greed slowly began to win over their fear. They started to check their weapons, the metallic clicks of their handguns filling the quiet warehouse. Derek looked at Maya's photo one last time before shoving it back into his pocket. He felt a sick sense of triumph. He was convinced that the walls Kai men had built were made of glass, and he was ready to shatter them. "She's nothing without me," Derek muttered to the empty air, his hands shaking with toxic rage. "I'm bringing her home, and this time she'll never see the sun again." The air inside the fortress felt tight, like a string pulled until it was ready to snap. In the high-tech command center, the walls were covered with glowing blue screens. Kai stood with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on a grainy video feed from a street corner 3 blocks away. Maya stood beside him, her reflection ghost-like in the monitors. On the screen, she saw a familiar, hunched figure. Derek was there, moving through the shadows and talking to a group of men in hooded sweatshirts. He was pointing toward the glass tower. "Our cameras picked him up an hour ago," Kai said. His voice was as cool as the air conditioning. "He is gathering his strength. He thinks he can surprise us. He's coming, Maya. Are you ready?" For a second, Maya felt a cold spike of terror shoot through her chest. Her old instincts, the ones that kept her alive for 3 years, screamed at her to find a closet and hide. She wanted to run until her lungs burned. Her hands started to shake and her vision blurred. Then she felt a heavy, warm weight on her shoulder. Kai didn't pull her away from the screen. He simply held her steady. "You don't run anymore," he said, his voice dropping to a low, firm whisper. "Running is what he expects. It is what he wants. Today you stand." The fear didn't disappear, but it changed. It became something sharp and useful like a blade. Maya took a deep breath and nodded. She left the command center and went to her suite to prepare. She didn't reach for the charcoal robe or anything soft. Instead, she put on the clothes Kai had provided for the coming storm. They were dark, fitted, and practical. The black fabric felt like a second skin, a suit of armor that didn't catch the light. As Kai's guards moved into their positions with silent, military precision, Maya stood before the full-length mirror in her room. She looked at her feet, planting them firmly on the floor. She pulled her shoulders back and leveled her chin. The bruises on her face had faded to a dull yellow, but her eyes were brighter than they had ever been. She practiced her stance one last time, watching herself in the glass. She realized that the woman in the torn white dress was truly gone. She wasn't worried about Derek's knife or his loud, angry voice anymore. She knew that Kai's men were ready to protect the building, but she knew she had to protect herself. A strange, calm realization washed over her. "I'm not afraid of Derek," she whispered to her reflection. "I'm afraid of becoming small again, and I will never let that happen." She turned away from the mirror and walked toward the door. She moved with fluid grace, taking up every inch of space she occupied. The nobody was gone. The ghost had found her haunt, and she was ready to face the man who tried to erase her. The alarm bells rang through the fortress like a high, screaming warning. Down in the lobby, the sound of glass shattering echoed up the elevator shaft. Derek and his hired thugs had forced their way inside, fueled by a mixture of greed and toxic rage. Maya stood in the center of the main floor, her heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. She could see Kai men standing in the shadows of the balcony above, his face unreadable. He had deactivated the heavy security doors on purpose. He wasn't leaving her unprotected, but he was giving her the floor. He wanted her to be the one to end this. The elevator dinned, and the door slid open with a smooth, metallic hiss. Derek stepped out first, clutching his knife so hard his knuckles were purple. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting around the room as he expected a small army of soldiers to jump out and attack him. His thugs followed close behind, their guns raised and their faces tight with sweat. They expected chaos. They expected a fight. Instead, they found a room filled with a terrifying, heavy silence. Maya was standing exactly where Kai had taught her. She was positioned in the very center of the polished stone floor, bathed in a soft, white spotlight. She wasn't hiding behind a pillar. She wasn't clutching her handbag. She was wearing the dark, practical clothes that made her look like part of the shadows. Her shoulders were pulled back. Her chin was level, and her feet were planted firmly on the ground. Derek froze. He looked at Maya, and for a moment, he didn't even recognize her. The woman he had spent 3 years breaking was gone. This woman took up space. This woman looked like she owned the air around her. Maya, Derek stammered, his voice sounding small and shrill in the massive room. He tried to shake off his confusion and gripped his knife tighter. Maya, get over here right now. I've had enough of this game. I'm taking you home where you belong. Maya didn't move. She didn't blink. She looked directly through Derek, focusing on the space just behind his head, exactly as Kai had shown her. Her large eyes were cold and clear. I am home, Derek, she said. Her voice didn't shake. It was a resonant, steady hum that carried across the quiet room. Derek laughed, but it was a nervous, jagged sound. He looked at his thugs for support, but they were busy looking at the dark corners of the ceiling, sensing the hidden power of the dragons. Denver, you're talking crazy. Derek spat, trying to regain control. You're an orphan. You have no one. These people are just using you. You're nothing without me. Maya took a single, deliberate step forward. The sound of her boot hitting the floor was as loud as a gunshot. Derek jumped back, his eyes wide with sudden, sharp fear. He realized in that moment that his words no longer had any hooks to grab her with. You spent 3 years trying to make me invisible, Maya said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You told me I was a ghost that no one would ever fight for. Thank you for that lesson, Derek, because ghosts can't be caught, and you can't hurt what you can't see. The silence in the room finally snapped. Derek's face twisted into a mask of pure, uncontrolled rage. He couldn't handle the fact that Maya was standing tall. He couldn't handle that she wasn't afraid. With a wild scream, he lunged forward, the knife raised high. He was moving with the desperate energy of a man who had already lost everything, but didn't want to admit it. He never reached her. Before Derek could take 3 steps, Kai's guards moved from the shadows. They didn't draw weapons or shout. They moved with fluid, terrifying precision. 2 men stepped into the light and simply blocked Derek's path. They used their bodies like stone walls, catching his arms and twisting the knife from his hand before it could even swing. Derek was pinned to the floor, thrashing and screaming that Maya belonged to him. His hired thugs saw the sheer power of the dragon's den and immediately dropped their guns, putting their hands in the air. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't look at the guards. She walked forward until she was standing directly over Derek. She looked down at him, her eyes calm and cold. For 3 years, this man had been the center of her universe, a giant who decided if she lived or died. Now, looking down at him, he looked small. He looked like a child throwing a tantrum in a room full of adults. Derek looked up at her, his face red and sweaty. You're nothing, he barked, though his voice was cracking. You have nobody, Maya. You'll always be an orphan. Maya leaned down slightly, meeting his gaze. She didn't feel anger. She felt a strange kind of peace. You're wrong, Derek, she whispered. You spent so long trying to erase me that you forgot to look at who I was becoming. You're already gone. You just don't know it yet. She stood back up and turned her back on him. It was the ultimate dismissal. She didn't wait to see him dragged away. She didn't listen to his fading screams as the guards escorted him and his men out of the building. In the distance, the faint, rhythmic wail of police sirens began to fill the night air. The war was over. A few minutes later, Maya stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in Kai's office. The city was a sea of glowing lights, stretching out forever. Kai stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his red tie a sharp line of color in the dim room. What will you do now, Maya? Kai asked. His voice was a low, respectful hum. The gates are open. You are free to go wherever you want. Maya looked at her reflection in the glass. She saw a woman with her shoulders back and her chin held high. The natural curls of her hair were thick and full. Beside her, the reflection of Kai Min showed the dragon tattoos on his neck, a symbol of the power that had shielded her until she could find her own. I'm going to build something that no one can ever take from me, Maya said. Her voice was steady and full of a new, iron-like strength. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't a runaway. She was a woman who had survived the dark and stepped into the light. The ghost had finally learned to haunt on her own terms.